Yes, you have to stay positive. You really do. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Baton Rouge. My name is Dr. James Gilmore, and you are tuned in to What's Going On, where we talk about what's going on locally here in our community, across the state, the nation, and the world. Again, thank you so much for tuning in to What's Going On with Dr. James Gilmore. Today, we have a return guest. Her name is Judge now, Tiffany Foxworth. Tiffany, thank you so much for joining me again in the studio.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Gilmore. It's
Absolutely.
an honor and pleasure to be in your presence.
Appreciate that. I'm going to go over a couple of things that's happening in the news before we start with you, okay? Because there's some things happening in our nation right now, and we may even talk about it. Let's talk about the beautiful Breonna Taylor, who was murdered by officers in a no-knock warrant endeavor. And unfortunately, it appears that there's still no justice for this young lady. These officers have not been arrested. And not only that, prosecutors appear to be trying to frame beautiful Breonna Taylor by trying to get her boyfriend to accept a plea bargain, saying that she was a member of organized crime. Now, this is a beautiful young African-American woman that was murdered in a botched no-knock warrant raid, who hasn't found justice. We haven't found justice. Her family hasn't found justice. No officer has been arrested, and while in death, they still try to slander her name. We have a crisis in this nation, multiple crises in this nation, and the innocent killing of people, regardless of color, in our nation by those who are to protect and serve us, is a crisis, and we must do something not only to find justice, but to stop police violence and the innocent killing of any human being, black or white, male or female. I'm praying for that family. Also in the news, it was just released, a video was just released from where an African-American man was on his knees, and then we see a plastic bag placed over his head. He then dies days later, and the coroner has ruled it a homicide as a result of asphyxiation. And unfortunately, we saw him on the news again being arrested. Another person, another human being, another American that is now dead as it relates to interacting with our police officers. We need to end this, and maybe this is something that we can talk about here on the show with Judge Tiffany Foxworth. But police violence towards innocent people that leads to murder and death is a crisis in America. And we all need to be paying attention to it, regardless of what color we are, our age groups, where we live, our economic status. This is a problem in America. And it's too many blacks that are dying, that are being murdered. But there are others out there, whites and white females, that are also being murdered innocently at the hands of rogue cops with techniques that lead to their death, such as knees being placed on necks and bags being placed on heads, on folks' heads. And we have to do something about this, and all of us in America should be alarmed and should be finding ways to take action. Find ways to take action. So those are just two things that I wanted to start and recognize in my show, What's Going On, because I want people to know what's going on in our nation. Hold on. No. Who? No, it's just you and I. Okay. Now we're going to go into our show with Judge Tiffany Foxworth, who's on our show today. She is here for a second time.
Hi.
You came during the last election.
I did.
And in that election, and since that time, a lot has happened.
Yes.
A lot has happened. So for those of you all, those who may not know you in my listening audience, let's just start again from the beginning. Tell us, who is Tiffany Foxworth? Who is Judge Tiffany Foxworth? Where are you from? A little bit about your educational background and your experiences in law.
Okay. Well, again, thank you for having me, Dr. Gilmore. I am Judge Tiffany Foxworth. I was recently elected to fill an unexpired term in the 19th Judicial District Court. That is Division M. That term expires on December the 31st of this year. It was previously held by Judge Bo Higginbotham, who ran for another seat, and actually took what I call a lateral move, because he's still in the judiciary in the 19th JDC. So I will also appear on the November 3rd ballot. This will be my third election in 4 months.
Third election in 4 months.
Third election in 4 months. In essence, we've been campaigning all year since January.
Wow.
Now, this is a criminal court seat that I preside over, and prior to being elected judge, I had a private practice law firm.
Okay.
Whereby I represented people in the Baton Rouge and surrounding areas, and I've done this for approximately 15 years.
Oh, wow.
And I'm a graduate of Southern University Law Center, Southern University School of Nursing. I've been a registered nurse just shy of 20 years. I am a veteran who served 13 years in the U.S. Army. I began as an enlisted soldier, E1, and rose through the ranks and discharged as a captain, 03, where I was commissioned into the Army Nurse Corps.
Oh, wow.
So my background has been very diverse. It's been one that has been deeply rooted in public service, and that is my mission, my goal in life, my calling, if you will, to do that, serve the public. I am so honored to serve as judge in our parish, and I would like to thank the listening audience who did support me. This is something that I definitely take seriously, as far as my role, not just in the judiciary, but also in the community. Something as a child that I could have never imagined doing. You know, I've actually even surpassed my own dreams, because growing up, I did not have access to mentors or role models who looked like me. You know, there were not people who were actively engaged in my community where I grew up in Mississippi, where I could see the positive influences of Black professionals. And that means a lot to me, and I do understand that even, you know, many years later in 2020, that there are people, little boys and girls, and, you know, even sometimes adults for that matter, who still need other people, you know, who have attained certain things in life, to go back to those communities and show that they care, give them guidance and direction, because you never know, you know, if you touch one person's life, that can change a family. With a family, changing a family dynamic, you can change the trajectory of the community.
Absolutely.
And so I feel very blessed and very honored to be in this position. And it's definitely something that I hold near and dear to my heart, being that when I grew up, I was only told to get a high school diploma. You know, I'm the first college graduate in my family.
Oh, wow.
And, you know.
So tell me, what do you contribute to your success? If you didn't have the mentors and people around, especially of color, that looked like you, to be examples, and you were being told, hey, you know, just get a high school education, what do you credit for all of the success, from nursing school, military, becoming a judge, becoming an attorney? What do you credit as your success?
I can say that there was definitely no blueprint for my life, but one thing that I can say, my family is very spiritual and deep rooted in prayer. You know, not along the lines of where I have a parents or grandparents who are in the ministry or anything like that, but I definitely have a praying family. And I believe that when you're guided to do things, that's God speaking to you and guiding you through life. And so I've actually just sort of stumbled into different things, if you will, because I've not had a blueprint. I've not sat down and said, well, okay.
So sort of self-determination.
Self-determination, if you will. I just felt like where I was in life was not where I was supposed to be. That God spared me from a lot of circumstances and situations in my past, and it was my duty and my obligation to do more and to give more. And the roles that I have undertaken throughout the years have been ones where I could work directly and hands-on with people to actually touch them and effectuate change.
So tell me, have you been sworn in yet, or?
I have been sworn in.
Okay.
Yes.
How has it been thus far since being elected?
Well,
have you got a docket yet, or
yes.
when has work started? Okay, tell
Yes,
us about that.
Work has started as a criminal judge. I preside over cases whereby there are persons charged with committing or allegedly committing criminal offenses within the jurisdiction of our parish. So those would be misdemeanors and felony offenses. And the felony cases range from matters such as theft, which would be like our lower level offenses, and they can go all the way up to capital punishment. So the death penalty is something that a judge who presides at this level would have to make a determination.
Okay. Your platform. You presented a platform the last time you were here in the previous election. Tell my listening audience, what's your platform? What do you stand for? How do you plan to be an asset to the judiciary and to our community here in Baton Rouge? What do you stand for? What are some of your principles and values?
First and foremost, I am attached to and committed to our community. I have a daughter myself who's now age 11. I moved to Baton Rouge to attend college at Southern University, and I love the city so much I made it home. So at this point, I've lived in Baton Rouge longer than I've lived everywhere, and I was a military brat coming up, so I bounced around a lot, but I've lived here longer than anyone else. When I moved here 20 plus years ago, one of the things that I loved the most was the sense of community and the sense of family. For that reason, I decided to make this my home, rear my child here, so I'm not going anywhere. This is where I'll be. As far as my platform is concerned, my platform is one of administering justice in an unbiased and impartial manner. Right now, the state of our nation is so polarized. There's so much divisiveness, and it's getting to the point where, I don't think that I've actually seen it this bad in my life.
I know I haven't seen it this bad in my lifetime.
And
we've read about it in social studies classes
right.
and history classes, and we are living those days all over again.
It's almost like we're in a different era.
Yes.
Yeah, it's reminiscent of things that I've seen that had happened or occurred in the past. And within the judiciary, that's where all people come seeking justice. There is no place for politics in the judiciary. There is no place for implicit or explicit systemic injustices. And these are things that I would not support, that I don't stand for. I believe in justice and equality for all. And that is definitely something that anyone who comes before me will get when they come before my court. As an attorney, I only worked in the private capacity, meaning I had a firm whereby people who needed legal representation would come to me, seeking legal services. And I was never employed. I've never, by an outside agency, I've never collected a paycheck, worked for a corporation, anything like that, because I wanted to stay deeply rooted and tied to the community to provide access to competent legal services, that people would need and would otherwise have access to. And throughout my tenure as an attorney, from the time that I took that oath moving forward, I have done just that. I have fought, for justice. I've fought for equality. I've fought for people to have equal access and rights in the courts and in the judiciary. I have never been sanctioned by our disciplinary council. And I don't know whether or not you know, but when you work with the public and people are displeased with your work product, especially if they paid you any money, they're going to file complaints. And I.
So you're saying you haven't had any complaints filed against you?
Well, no. Although you can get complaints, there have never been any that were deemed meritoriously, and so I have never been sanctioned or disciplined by any extent or capacity. And so,
what are some cases, if you can talk about it, that you're most proud of, that you've represented people, and maybe an example where they were about to be, railroaded, or an injustice? What are some cases that you make to talk about that you're proud of where you represented the people?
Well, I can tell you that throughout the course of 15 years, I've represented a lot of people. Especially in this area. At one point, my practice extended all the way out as far as like Tangipahoa Parish, Orleans, St. Helena, Iberville, just like all surrounding areas. And so,
what has been the greatest justice you've been a part of? And I know there've been many. I think you even had a video of a young man, or a young man had a video come out. I mean, that might have been one of your cases. I'm not sure. What has been some of the greatest justice you've experienced?
There was a young man who was charged with having committed a crime, and he was arrested for first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. Now, when a person is charged with a crime, statutorily, meaning it comes from the legislature, if they're found guilty, there's mandatory time that they would have to serve. They have minimum time.
And what do you think about these mandatory sentences? What do you think about mandatory times?
I think that it gives the judges a guide point, if you will, a guide as to how to sentence people. I think that, I've actually thought about this Throughout the time that I've been an attorney, we've only had guidelines. My concern would be if there were no guidelines, there being a even playing field, or I think that it may give too wide discretion without the guidelines there. So I think that we do need to have some sort of guideline.
But what about those mandatory sentences that many of us of color?
Well, with most cases, in Louisiana, the only type crimes that we have mandatory time would be like your homicides, where there's a mandatory life in prison sentence, for homicides and aggravated rape cases, things of that nature. But other than that, there is a sentencing range for every crime that the legislature actually mandates. So that does not come from the judiciary. That comes from your state representatives and your state senators. They are the ones who are responsible for the bills.
Do you see a role of the judiciary in influencing public policy at the legislature, such as mandatory sentencing and things like that? Do you see a role of the judiciary?
Well, yes, of course there is, because the two are hand in hand. Now, but as judges cannot take positions on matters that could ultimately come before the court. You know, we are governed by our judicial canons, and as a sitting judge, we are barred from taking positions on certain issues that may deem by others or to, you know, to other people to be a conflict of interest, or where a judge could be deemed to be biased or, you know, leaning towards more towards one direction or another. We have to be independent minded, independent thinkers, well versed in issues as it pertains to the code of evidence, especially on the trial court level, because it's the evidence that's the crux of the case. And we look at witness credibility, and we set bonds, we review bonds.
Wow, bonds are high.
And sentence, and the judges are responsible for the sentencing, which the legislature sets the guidelines on.
So let's talk about some of the issues that are happening in our community, African American community. Prison, you know, from birth to prison pipeline, it's there. You know, African Americans, we're stuck in the criminal justice system, and it leads to so many negative outcomes in our families and our communities. The bail system, reform is needed. What are your thoughts, or what are your ideals or principles or values as it relates to those things that are impacting the African American culture and community the most in a negative way, as it relates to their interaction with the criminal justice system?
Well, I'll first speak on bail reform. The purpose of bail is to, one, ensure public safety, and two, ensure a defendant's return to court. Bail should not be used as a tool to incarcerate people, or, you know, as a punitive means. You know, there's specific guidelines which judges should look at in determining bail criteria, are setting a bond, whether or not the person would be deemed a flight risk, whether they have significant ties to the community, you know, whether or not future criminal activity would be, whether or not a person would engage in future criminal activity while awaiting trial. So there is a number of different things that the judges should look at prior to setting bail. Typically, what's done is they get the criminal background, they review criminal backgrounds, the affidavit of probable cause, which are the circumstances which gave rise to their arrest, and judges can make that determination just on the front end. But it's incumbent upon the judge to actually go through these files, read the files, assess the files, and then if they have any doubts, we could order the defendants to come into court. We can, you know, see them for ourselves, find out about them, you know, find out whether or not they have any ties to the community at all, whether or not this is a repeat offender, because ultimately we all want to live in a safe community. You know, although, you know, especially right now in the news media, we're starting to see a lot of matters that result in unfavorable outcomes that are geared more towards one race than others. You know, we have to maintain the integrity of the court system so that people who are accused of crimes, victims, and the public have access to a competent, unbiased court system. At the end of the day, there is a reason why they say justice is blind, because there should be no color, no ambiguity, no political affiliation, anything that comes into justice being rendered before the eyes of the court. You asked another question about it was bail reform.
Yeah, bail.
And what was the second part?
Just the prison, you know, cradle to prison pipeline. You know, what's you know, it's filled with us African Americans in a system that's just, you know, it has lingering effects. When fathers and mothers are locked up and they can't afford bail, and they go to trial, and trial is, years later or months later, and they're unemployed. It's a terrible cycle. And so, what are your thoughts and policies or ideas about criminal justice reform, especially as it relates to our people? Go ahead.
First and foremost, that's why I spoke on being out and active in the community. I think it's incumbent upon people who hold themselves out to be public servants to be accessible, to be available, for people to see that there are people who take an interest in them.
And do you consider that's something that you would definitely want to do as judge, is be accessible and in the community? That's
something that I was doing before I was elected judge, because the journey doesn't begin post-election. That's your works along the way. If you have a genuine interest in it and a passion in it, your passion will begin pre-election. And so you have to take an interest. You have to be a part of the community. People have to know that there are people even who preside in these positions or hold these positions, that they don't just sit high and look low, but they have a vested interest. Another thing is that I am a proponent of specialty courts. In my practice, I've seen
specialty courts. Let's talk about that. Yeah.
I've seen where there are a lot of people who come into the court system, especially now, that have mental health issues. It's not so much that these people are innately criminals, as in they have medical or mental health issues. So I believe in specialty courts, like mental health courts, and so I'm gonna begin with that one. We have people who lack resources to obtaining medical care, and if they receive their medications, they don't have anyone to properly administer them. Mental health courts can do that. They can set them up with advocates in the community, people who can be responsible and help them out in their journey.
Instead of sending them straight to jail.
Exactly. These people should not be penalized for something that they have no control over. Another thing are pretrial courts. There are people who are charged with lower level offenses, and especially in communities that have lower socioeconomic resources, they can't afford attorneys. People especially, we're in the midst of a pandemic. People have to utilize their money and their financial resources to live, not on legal representation. So for nonviolent crimes, lower level offenses, I support pretrial diversion courts, whereby a person can come in and you can rehabilitate them on the front end, whether that be community service work. Sometimes we can have them go out and speak to students, high school students, about the importance of being a positive person, a positive role model in the community. They can take classes on effective decision making, things of that nature. Veterans courts. As a veteran myself, I'm a strong proponent of this. We have people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder based off of things that they have experienced in life. And as a result of that, it can manifest itself as a mental health disorder. And that's something that should be treated even within the court system versus pushing pro-conviction. And lastly, I would say a re-entry program. There are people who have been charged with crimes, and when they are convicted, once they have a conviction on their record, it can make it difficult for them to obtain meaningful and gainful employment. It's my personal belief that what separates us as human beings from animals is our survival instincts. People will do what they have to do to survive, whether that be go on one course or path that would lead to crime or otherwise, because at the end of the day, it's survival of the fittest. So if we put programs out there to help them get re-engaged in the workforce system post-conviction or post-criminal post-criminal system, then that will help them to gain meaningful employment where they can support themselves, support their children, and be able to be law-abiding, tax-paying citizens.
It's good to hear you say because these specialty courts are needed.
Yeah.
They're needed now more than ever. And if we have specialty courts, then we need to make sure they're utilized and that they grow, and that our judges use them as options for those specific situations.
So when you talk about was it prison to pipeline systems,
cradle to prison
pipeline systems, those monies or fundings rather would be better utilized if they were put into these specialty courts, you know, whereby we can rehabilitate people. Ultimately, again, the objective is that we all have a safe community to live in, where people prosper, where people grow as one, you know, together as one Baton Rouge, if you will.
So let's transition now to a bit of a controversy. You've had a little controversy over in 2020. Let's talk about some photos that came about where you know, you attended what appeared to be a rally, and it appeared to be a rally for our in support of our current president, who many believe, including myself, are opposite. He believes opposite, and the people who support him believe opposite of some of the things you've talked about that you support today. You know, the policy that you support today. You know, I can't judge anyone, but probably the folks that were at the event that you were allegedly at don't believe in some of the things that you talked about today. So tell me your thoughts about that photo, that experience, what's true and not untrue about it. Let the listening audience know where you stand as it relates to policies that align with the people who may have been at that rally where you attended, which, you know, tend to not align with some of the things that you talked about today that you stand for.
Okay, I'm definitely familiar with what you're speaking of. And first and foremost, I can tell you that I have never attended a rally in support of anyone. Throughout this entire year, I qualified for office on January the 8th. And throughout this entire calendar year, I have rallied behind and campaigned for Tiffany Foxworth. That is it. I have supported no one but Tiffany Foxworth. That is period. That's it. Now, as far as a photograph that disseminated, I am familiar with what you're speaking of, and I did attend a function on the 4th of July, and I attended multiple functions on the 4th of July, whereby I went around through the community, and whenever I saw gatherings, at the time, of course, we're still in our pandemic, during the midst of the pandemic, but if I saw any small gatherings, I stopped, I spoke to the people who were there, I introduced myself around, because the judiciary is not a place that should be polarized. I will sit in judgment over everyone in this parish. So I am not one to alienate nor isolate anyone. Now, I can respect differences that appear as they may be apparent or unapparent with anyone. However, I would never be one to disassociate myself from any members of our community, especially when I'm out running for office. You know, how do people get to know you? How do you, come in contact with people? How do you connect with and see what the needs are of the people in the community if you alienate or isolate yourself from them? So I can tell you that, you know, on 4th of July, I began at Boiling Root, where there was a mural painted in the parking lot. I headed up north. I did see a gathering along in front of the governor's mansion, and
was that where their event was at?
Yes,
I wasn't sure where it was
at the governor's mansion. And you're a student in politics, so I'm sure that if there was a national candidate or national figure in town that would have been known. So no, that's false information that was put out. And then I headed up north to Baker, where I went to barbecues and crawfish boils and crab boils. You know, because again, as a public figure or a public servant, you need to be out in the community where the people are.
Right.
And I have no problem doing
So you were
that.
campaigning.
Yes.
You were campaigning for Tiffany Fox.
For Tiffany
during those
Foxworth.
days. Okay.
And it's quite apparent because every place I went, I had on a shirt that read, "Vote Tiffany Foxworth."
Gotcha.
Another thing, I'd be remiss if I did not state this. As judicial candidates are held to the same standard as sitting judges. We have judicial canons that bar and prohibit us from endorsing or publicly supporting any candidate. So, as being that I have not been charged or of having violated any such offense, of being in violation of these canons and endorsing a candidate,
So
I
what
can
you're
tell
saying
you
is
that did
because
not
no one has
happen.
brought any charges against you for endorsing any person that got you.
But why would I have an interest in endorsing a candidate when I am a candidate?
Okay.
That just
Well, I
wouldn't
just
be
wanted
logical.
I wanted to give you the opportunity
Yes.
to talk about that because
Yes.
that was something that was pretty controversial in your journey, and so just wanted to, and again, listening to what your political stances and not necessarily political stances, but your beliefs and values this morning. Just again, not judging anyone that was at that rally or at that event, but based on what you said this morning, probably wouldn't align with some of the people and the signs that they were supporting, and so I just wanted to look at that dichotomy. That's all.
Well, I can speak as far as my observations. There was nothing there in support of any candidate.
Oh, okay, got it. I thought I saw a Trump sign. That's why I asked. Okay,
No,
gotcha.
per my observation.
I gotcha.
And in addition to that, if there was a picture taken of me there and my opponent circulated it, then there would have had to have been someone there from my opponent's team to even capture the photography to disseminate it. I believe.
We're not here to accuse anyone who might
I
taken the
believe,
photo or whatever.
yeah, I believe that to be nothing more than a desperate attempt to cause further divisiveness. There has been nothing said about my failure to go into the courtroom and handle my business these past 15 years that I've been an attorney. There is nothing that has been spoken to the fact that I lack knowledge in the law. I can tell you I am the only person from day one, the only person who has even had a jury trial on the state court level. So if you want to speak to experience, I am the only person who is experienced in the judiciary at this level. So this is not city court where we have tickets and misdemeanors. These are people where judges are called to make decisions that have an impact and affect a person's life. This can be a life or death situation. Trial court judges have the ability to make determinations as to whether or not, by virtue of executing a warrant, they can compel people to give up their DNA. They can order, allow people law enforcement to come in to people's homes for search and seizure. They sentence people to life, sentence people to death. They can take their people's children away from them.
And
so
the public should put confidence in you.
Yes, the public should hold confidence in me because I have, throughout my entire adulthood, I have fought for people's constitutional rights and protections as a soldier in the Army. I have shown compassion as a registered nurse working in the hospital, whereby when I went in and got my patient population every night, I could not pick and choose who I was going to take care of. I took care of everyone that came in. And as an attorney, for the people who I represented, the hundreds upon hundreds of people that I represented, I went into court. I represented these people to the fullest and best of my ability. Never did I compromise my morals, my convictions. I fought for their rights. I fought against injustice, and that is something that I stand firm on.
Well, thank you, Judge Tiffany Foxworth, for coming on the show today and communicating with me and the public about your stance on issues, about your platform, about a little controversy that you've had in the past, and I appreciate you returning on the show because there is a November 3rd election, and folks that may not know, she is up for election because that was the seat that she recently won. It was to fill an expired term, and so you're on the ballot November 3rd.
I am.
Any closing message to the listening audience that's listening?
I would again like to thank the listening audience for your support and entrusting me to uphold the law and uphold justice within the judiciary. I will maintain the integrity of the judiciary. If you should ever have any questions or doubts in your mind, feel free. You can come into my courtroom, 6201, for observation, and that's in the 19th Judicial District Court. I began taking cases on Monday, and so the public can see for themselves how I function in this role in such capacity. And again, I would like to reiterate that, in my courtroom, you will have access, everyone will have access to justice, equality, and I will rule in accordance with the law in a fair, unbiased, and impartial manner.
Okay. Well, thank you so much again, Judge Foxworth, for being on the show. Thank you, listening audience, for tuning in. Between the entire month of September, as well as the entire month of October, we have several candidates that will be on the show. The goal here is for you to become informed on their platforms and their stances on issues. I ask you all to tune in every Tuesday and Thursday, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. to learn about the candidates, their values, and where they stand on issues. I also want to encourage you all to submit your questions to me on Facebook in my inbox. I don't do call-ins on this show right now because I want to give the people the opportunity to communicate their platforms. I want to give people the opportunity to share information. So if you have questions you'd like for me to ask candidates, please send them to me. And then that way I can prepare those questions for the show. But I do not take call-ins on this show, not at this moment. I know my brother Eugene Collins does on his show, but I don't take call-ins on this show. So the phone's been ringing all morning, but Tiffany's very accessible, I'm sure. She has no problem on her Facebook page or email answering your questions. And all of the candidates are the same way. I'm going to give them an opportunity to share their platform. We will not be taking questions because that could derail a good show, and I want to get those questions ahead of time. Again, thank you for tuning in every Tuesday and Thursday, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. My name is Dr. James Gilmore, and you are listening to What's Going On, WTQT 106.1 FM. Have a fantastic rest of your day.